Hey, what's up guys? My name is Cameron Gallagher from We Are Film, and today I want to make a video really just chill, just kind of talking to the camera about the Canon R6 and the R5. I'm going to be talking in particular more about the R6 because I find the R6 a lot more interesting than the R5. I'm going to be real with you right now. 8K is stupid. You don't need it. It's way over the top, as still most TVs are barely beyond 720p. That's right. If you look and find, I think the average is still like 720p. In my case, 8K is ridiculous. You don't need that type of file size. So I still find the R6 very interesting, and I want to talk about sort of my opinion on the R6 and kind of why I see it to be maybe a camera purchase for myself in the future. Now, I kind of clickbaited you a little bit. I'm not going to be selling my Ursa or getting rid of my Ursa. It's not going to become my main camera by any means. But I do think this has become a camera that I use more often than not, and that's because of a few things. So the biggest thing to me about the Canon R6, this is a full-frame camera from Canon, and I really do love Canon cameras, and don't get me wrong, I know Canon's had their problems and stuff, but Canon cameras are really good. Canon's kind of like Apple. You know, they do something and they wait, and people get people give them a lot of crap because they wait until the last minute to do something, but it's because they're doing it right. And that's one thing that I do love that both Canon and Apple do, is when they implement stuff, they usually do it correctly and they do it as best they possibly can, where some other companies will just rush to throw something out there and get it out there, and then it ends up being not as good and then being a problem. So the biggest thing I see to this Canon R6 is the fact that it is a full-frame camera that is a photo and video camera that can shoot 4K 60p internally for video in 422 10-bit, but also that has the image stabilization and the autofocus of a Canon camera. And to me, that is what is the most incredible. So I have some of the specs here. So one of the big things too is obviously the ISO range, up to 102,000 ISO. Now, obviously we don't really have enough tests to totally show like what a good ISO is, but the way I look at it is if this camera can get 6400 ISO, like both for photo and video, I mean, you're talking, that's a huge step in low noise. And the way I look at it is something like the Ursa, I can get to 1600, probably okay, in the GH5 and some of the other cameras that I have. So I'm comfortable at, I'm going to refocus here. I'm comfortable at, 1600 ISO depending on the camera. But to have a camera that could be full frame, go up to, maybe 6400 ISO in a clean way, obviously you could get up to 102,000. That's a little ridiculous. But like I said, even 6400 ISO, like if you can do that really, really clean, that's awesome. And I think this is a 20 megapixel. Yeah, so it's a 20 megapixel camera, which in my case, 20 megapixels is more than enough. I don't see the need for like the 40 or 50 megapixel cameras. I just don't think it's that needed. I think it's cool and it's great, but it's like for most things, like 20 megapixels is going to keep the file sizes nice and low, especially on the photo angle, which again is great and something that I'd be looking forward to. Obviously, you have the shooting up to 12 frames per second with the mechanical shutter. That's awesome for sports. Now, I don't do photography full time, but I still like the idea of having a camera that can do really good photo, really good video, and I can have it with me all the time because it's small. It's a nice camera. So one of the biggest things is the autofocus. Now, this really interests me because I'm not a huge autofocus person, but at the same time, I don't care. If it gets the shot and it gets it well, I don't care. I'm not somebody who's going to say, no, I'll never use autofocus because it's blah, blah, blah. Like, I really don't care. Like, if the autofocus looks good and if it works and it gets the shot, who cares? And in particular, where I see this autofocus being amazing is on a gimbal. Because the camera's pretty small, using this type of thing on a gimbal, being able to have a 4K 60, 422, 10-bit camera on a gimbal, that's pretty awesome. And using that, Canon has pretty much the best autofocus. Like, it's pretty much unbeatable. To be able to have Canon's autofocus in a camera like that, I mean, that's just, it's incredible. Obviously, for the photo aspect, it's awesome. It's quick. It's fast. And obviously, if you're working with the Canon RF, I think it's RF lenses, which you want to be and you pretty much have to be, it's going to work amazing. So they're going to be super fast and obviously just be able to get the job done right. And one of the other big things is obviously, yes, there's 4K 60, 422 internal, or 1080, 120 frames, 422 internal in Canon log. That's amazing. But we kind of know that's like the big thing is like this 422 internal and 4K 60 or HD 120 frames. That's awesome. I already have it on the Ursa, so it's not like a huge thing to me. But for me, having that full frame, full frame's whatever. But it's having it with the autofocus and with what I'm going to talk about next, which is the stabilization. The stabilization is huge because having this type of in-body stabilization means that this is a camera you could probably handhold quite a bit and get a lot of good shots from, or on a monopod maybe. But you could use it on a gimbal. It's small enough, it's light enough, and you're going to get great gimbal shots too. And it could help, I mean, it could make it worse, but it also could help take out any of those kind of, Y jitters from the actual gimbal. So who knows? If the combination of this is really good, talk about a perfect gimbal camera, has great autofocus, 4K 60 internal and 1080, 120 frames internal, 422, and then being able to have that autofocus and that image stabilization. I mean, it's like the perfect gimbal camera pretty much. Like I don't see there being like a better gimbal camera than this. But beyond that, the one thing that I really do like about the idea, well, I'll give you a couple more stats too. So of course there's the built-in OLED EVF, which is cool and it's great. The dual SD cards, that's great for weddings, so you have a backup while you're actually shooting, so that way you can make sure you're having redundant recording. That's awesome. It is UHS 2, which obviously you have to have, but it's like really expensive. But this is where I see this camera, and this is why this camera intrigues me. So to price out, it's basically $2,500 for the R6, and to get a lens, the 24-70 f2.8 is $2,200. So it's like you're looking at about $5,000. That's expensive. That's not a cheap camera. Not at all. But the versatility of that camera is what really intrigues me for a couple reasons. So the thing is, obviously, this is it's pushing on a cinema camera at this point, right? Like the 4K, 10-bit, 60 frames internal, and full HD 120 frames internal in 422. Like that's cinema camera. That's basically what the Ursa does. I mean, the Ursa does a little more, but to give what I'm saying, like that's a cinema camera. It's a cinema camera that has in-body image stabilization, that's lightweight, and that also has, the autofocus, which is basically unmatched. And it's full frame. The other thing is from the photo angle, this is a photo camera, so a great photo camera with great autofocus, a great nice 20 megapixels. I feel like it's a nice in-between. It's a big photo, but it's not huge. It's not gigantic, but it's also not like super small. It's not like 12 megapixels. So a nice photo that's full frame. So it's basically like you have a Canon 5D and kind of like a way better Panasonic GH5S combined. Has high ISO too, or like a Sony A7R III or something. Having those combined in one camera body, to me, is what's such a huge selling point about this camera. And that's what really intrigues me, is for someone who does weddings and corporate stuff. And I also just like doing photography for fun. Like I don't do photography professionally. Like we have photographers that work with us. I'm going to leave a link down in the description below, and you know what I'm talking about. So for me, I'm not looking for something that can, this is a camera that can do both. And the way I look at it is to have this in my arsenal. Obviously I have my Ursa Mini Pro G2, which is a monster. I mean, this thing's great for commercials and music videos and short films and even weddings, but it's like, I could run an EO or, the R6 at a wedding and it just be the camera and the 24-70. That's it. And the gimbal. It's really stripped down. And I think that although it's not a cheap camera, it's not a cheap lens, the combination could be really lethal in a sense of you could have that and, again, just be so fast. Like I just think about the speed that you could have with a 24-70 on this camera and be able to shoot 4K 60, 1080, 120, and also take great photos. Like the speed in which you could do everything is just incredible. There's a couple things that are holding me back. One is the money. I really don't know if I want to spend $5,000 on this camera just yet. And we haven't seen enough of it, I think, to figure out its issues. Which brings me to my two biggest things: is the overheating, which people have talked about. If this thing overheats, I've heard there's a video, I can't remember exactly who did it. There's a video where they were talking about the overheating possibly cutting off at like 25 minutes. If that's the case, this camera's unusable. At that point, I don't even think this camera's worth it, because if the camera can't run for 25 minutes shooting 4K 60, more than 25 minutes, like that's a big, big issue. Like the GH5 can shoot 4K 60. It's internal 8-bit. You know what I mean? That could do it, no problem. So I get it. It's not 30. It's not super, or it's not a full frame sensor. I get there's differences, but in my eyes, if it truly has this overheating issue, which it may not, but it's just something that came up. If it does have this overheating issue, I think this camera is thrown out the window, and I probably would never buy it, because in my case, it would be unusable. The other one is the battery life, and I'm really curious about this one because I don't care if the battery life is not great, but for instance, if I could shoot a wedding on about 3 or 4 batteries, that's totally fine with me. My GH5, 3 batteries for most weddings. Most cameras would take you 2 or 3 batteries, if they're good on battery life. So if you could get a wedding with 4 camera batteries, I'd be totally fine. If you start getting up to like 6 or 7 batteries for all day, then you start getting to the point where, you're changing it maybe every 25 minutes or so, and it's like, that gets a little bit much. If the battery can last like an hour and a half of recording time, I'd be really happy with that. I mean, I'm used to the Ursa, which gets like 3.5 hours on the V-mounts. It can also get like 2.5 hours powering accessories. So we'll kind of see how that goes. And those are my 2 biggest things right now, is the overheating and the battery. If we find out that those, and which is why I'm not going to pre-order it right now, because I want to see what those, how that works. If those work, and if those are not big issues, I think this camera could pretty much replace, it basically would become my main B camera and replace my GH5, replace pretty much any other camera I have, because it would probably become like my A camera. I don't want to say my A camera because I'll use the Ursa for most big projects, but on smaller projects or photo projects or stuff where I'm not going to be, I don't need the Ursa and all of its features, I would probably just bring that because I could shoot easily, quickly. And I don't like that because it is a little bit of lazy filmmaking, I feel like sometimes, where it's just like, oh, it's a small body, it's got image stabilization, like let me just go grab some quick B-roll. But what gets the job done gets the job done at the end of the day. So that's how I feel about it. So I'm excited to see this camera. I'm really excited because I've been really thinking about buying a photo camera. I was thinking about picking up like a 5D Mark II or Mark III on eBay used or something. And then I saw this and I was like, all right, well, maybe it's time to like buy this. And then it would be like a great B camera instead of the GH5, which is like a great video camera. It's not full frame, but it's still a great video camera, but it doesn't take great photos. Like, it's just not a great photo camera, and the autofocus is an issue. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how I feel. But once I kind of find out more about the battery and the overheating situation, I kind of decide, and we'll figure it out from there. So be sure to stay subscribed, or subscribe if you're not already, because we're definitely going to have some videos on that coming soon if we do end up picking it up. We also have some other videos that are coming soon. I also had an interview with Ryan Connolly. I'm going to link down in the description below. That was really awesome. So anyway, guys, it's been a pretty chill video. Thanks for sticking around. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later.